I'm very, very happy to be here to speak to you about the fights that have animated the Quebec fights in the last few years. It falls at a good time because we have crossed, during the last year, a period of negotiations to defend all of the public services, including public education. Also, we made an attempt to have an illegal social strike at the CEGEP level, the college level, and I'll be talking about that in the presentation. But before, a little explanation of the context. In 2014, April 7, without knowing, because there was no question during the political campaign, the Quebecois elected a very neoliberal government which really liked budget cuts, zero deficits, and an equilibrium budget. This government, despite the advice from the unions, decided to cut all of the public services, including health, social services, education, more than $1 billion in cuts in post-secondary education and in preschool education. A total of $4 billion cuts in 2 years. In about 7 to 8 million population, it's a lot. Against this government, and because during the negotiation rounds in 2005, the government had imposed a special law, we decided to hold our forces and to create what we called a common front. I will tell you. I'll save you the details about all of the different organizations. There are a number of different organizations which the CSQ belongs to. The Federation of Quebec Workers and the National Workers. Over 400,000 workers in public services. There was we had to catch up a lot with the private sector. Within the municipalities.
Llegar al mismo nivel de preparación como el sector privado. Pedíamos un aumento de salario de 4.5%.
Just because of all the increased costs, we had to increase by 4.5% and 2%. We asked for a fixed amount that would be given. A fixed amount would have a bigger impact on a low salary than a high salary. We also wanted to reduce the need for subcontracting and privatizing of. This was part of our demands. We wanted the government to revalorize public services and holding on to workers in the public sector. It's important to say that this fight that we were fighting, that we have in many ways won, the work that was done ahead of the negotiations, especially on behalf of the education workers, either professionals or support workers in education. The FSQ had a campaign of valorizing education, which is often unknown by the public. It started with the Teachers Federation that resembled members of the teaching population across Quebec. Then that showed that carrying out a teaching job with budget cuts is a really huge and difficult barrier to overcome. The three federations that represent teachers and support workers in education also put themselves together on this valuing campaign to honor and value the teaching population. This campaign was also shown in a short commercial that lasts 30 seconds that I'm going to show you. Thank you. With this ad in this campaign, it showed that with cuts of $1 billion, kids are still learning. If they're still learning, it's because of the help, the support of teachers and support staff. This brings us to, with this work, in these negotiations, we went and looked for a strike mandate among all of the 400,000 members. It had been a long time because we believed in our demands, we believed in public education. We were successful at getting a mandate for the strike. And you see, more than 78% of the teachers and more than 81% of the professional workers and more than 80% of the professional workers also. And this awareness-raising campaign helped us to raise awareness among the population. Then that created a movement, a public citizens movement called I Protect My Public School, which belonged to the parents. The people in the general population found that the austerity measures of the government wasn't unacceptable and decided to form a movement as well. And they made a human change around the provincial government buildings in Quebec. This was a really important part of the movement. In post-secondary education, especially in CEGEPs, which are colleges in between high school and university, and they take 3 years of school that either leads them to school or of work, and as well, it also 1 year that leads to university studies. So the workers are public sector workers, and they also mobilized during this negotiations, and they had a strong strike mandate as well. You can see the numbers below. Here are some photos of the strike, of how many people were mobilized. When we had a strike the last time in 2003, we were given a very strong law forcing us to return to work with conditions of work that made our members very worried. So if we had the strike mandate, we had to be sure that we had the support of our members and that we would protect them from these laws. We didn't want to give the government the pretext to be able to adopt another special law. And we also wanted to minimize the impacts, financial impacts of the strike. And that's why we decided to have rotating strikes across the province. One day, certain regions would be on strike, another day, other region, etc. And then a final day of strike across the province. And we gave up a certain number of compromises as well during the negotiations. Among others, they offered 3% of salary increases across 5 years, which was 2 years without any salary increases. But we got 15% over 5 years. And you can see on this slide that wasn't translated. Maybe the translator forgot to do it or didn't know how to translate it. I'm not sure. I can't tell you why. It's comparing the structures of employment. Certain categories of employment got more increase in pay than others. We decided not to embark in a negotiation where the augmentations and salaries were different depending on your sector of work, because it's very complicated. In the last round of negotiations, we countered all of the government's demands, and one that we arrived through countermising. Finally, the movement that started from the base in April 2015 in the teachers and CEGEP teachers to protest against the austerity measures of the government that touched at many colleges as well. And many local syndicate unions decided to start a social strike. This is illegal in Quebec. We can't have a strike outside of the period of negotiations. Otherwise, we're brought to court. And this is what happened on April 30th, 2015, where 30 unions had a day of social strike, and the government decided to take them to court in front of the work relations tribunal. And the law 37 that shapes these negotiations. But despite the order of the court, some unions decided to do it anyways. And there were some monetary penalties, but because the employers in these colleges are well aware of the impacts of these cuts, they were in support of the people on the strike. So finally, we accepted the mandate. There was a desire among members to retake over this way of negotiating. We had to protest against these austerity measures in Quebec. And they created a word that's a fusion between austerity and authority.
Una palabra entre la austeridad y la autoridad.
So here, I thank you very much for listening to me.